Early 1983. A superintendent's basement in Chelsea, Manhattan. The space is cramped, damp, and barely adequate, converted from storage into what Wharton Tiers optimistically calls a recording studio. An 8-track Tascam console sits in the corner, surrounded by tangled cables and cheap microphones. This is where Sonic Youth has come to record what they think will be a quick 7-inch single. They've just returned from their first real tour. 2 brutal weeks supporting Swans through the American South, culminating in a show at the Pier in Raleigh, North Carolina. The tour was baptism by fire. Tensions exploded between shows. Their drummer, Bob Burt, was fired mid-tour after guitarist Thurston Moore constantly criticized his playing, claiming he wasn't in the pocket. Jim Sklavounos, a towering 6'7" figure from the no-wave scene who'd played with Lydia Lunch in Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, stepped in to replace him. Now they're in Tiers' basement with a handful of new songs, no budget, and a simple plan. Record a follow-up single to their self-titled debut EP. Something quick and cheap to support their next round of shows. But Glenn Branca has other ideas. Branca, the avant-garde composer and founder of Neutral Records, is the closest thing to a mentor this band has. When he hears the first recordings, particularly a track called Inhuman, he immediately recognizes something. The songs are too good, too urgent to waste on a 7-inch. He pushes them to expand the session into a full album. There's just one problem. Neutral Records is broke. Branca can barely afford to keep the label running. To fund a full album, Sonic Youth will need to get creative. Enter Nicola Ceresole and Catherine Bachmann, a pair of European bohemians descended from money, immersed in New York's downtown art scene. When the band explains their predicament, Ceresole makes a decision that changes everything. He calls his Danish father, who owns a beer company, and asks for money, claiming he needs it for dental work. The father wires the funds. The album is on. But as Sonic Youth prepares to record their debut full-length, they have no idea they're about to create one of the most important albums in noise rock history, or that the process will nearly tear them apart. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of noise rock's most important albums, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing you these untold stories from music history. Now let's step inside that basement. Wharton Tiers' studio isn't a studio in any traditional sense. It's the basement of a building where he works as a superintendent, a job he took specifically to have access to this space. The recording setup is primitive. An 8-track console that cost him a few $1,000s, equipment he assembled piece by piece, all crammed into a room that's barely climate-controlled. According to one account, the console itself was actually 2 4-track machines spliced together to create 8 tracks. It's makeshift, unstable, and perfect for what Sonic Youth is trying to do. Tiers himself is a product of the same scene. He'd played in Theoretical Girls with Glenn Branca, understanding the aesthetic of downtown New York's no-wave movement, the deliberate rejection of polish, the embrace of rawness as artistic statement. When Lee Ronaldo initially approached him, Tiers quoted $400 to record and press $1,000 singles. It seemed impossible, but Tiers knew how to work cheap. The band arrives with their instruments, a collection of battered pawnshop guitars that barely hold tuning. They can't afford good equipment, but that limitation becomes part of the sound. Moore later admitted to Branca that their guitars were so bad they couldn't make them work properly. In standard tuning, they sounded cheap, lifeless. The solution would come later, alternate tunings that would define Sonic Youth's career. But for Confusion Is Sex, everything is still in standard tuning. They're working with what they have, trying to capture something visceral and immediate. Jim Sklavounos sits behind the drum kit, his metronomic playing providing the brutal, controlled foundation for the chaos erupting around him. His background in no wave means he understands the aesthetic instinctively. This isn't about technical perfection. It's about intensity, about capturing a feeling of urban violence and creative liberation. Moore plays guitar and, on half the album, handles bass duties as well. Kim Gordon moves between bass and vocals, her deadpan delivery cutting through the noise like a knife. Lee Ranaldo plays guitar on most tracks, but, in a unique moment in Sonic Youth's history, switches to bass for one song, Protect Me You. It's the only time he'll ever play bass on a Sonic Youth record. Assistant John Erskine helps Tears capture sounds that are deliberately lo-fi. Textures that sound like they're recorded through layers of grime and static. The band is creating a sonic assault, guitars that screech, feedback that builds like pressure in a sealed room, rhythms that pummel without mercy. Thanks for sticking with us this far into the story. If you appreciate these detailed music documentaries, consider subscribing. It really helps the Sound Vault grow and bring you more stories like this. Next up, the crisis that almost killed the album before it was finished. Jim Sclavunos is frustrated. He's been with Sonic Youth for only a few months, brought in after Bob Burt's firing during the Swans tour. On paper, it should work. Sclavunos is a legend in the downtown scene, his no-wave credentials impeccable. He's recorded with Lydia Lunch, designed album covers for Suicide, played in bands that help define the movement. But something isn't clicking. The unconventional recording situation in Tears' basement is part of it. The makeshift equipment, the cramped space, the pressure of trying to capture performances in a setting that's barely professional. But there's something deeper. Musically, Sclavunos doesn't feel aligned with where Sonic Youth is heading. His drumming on the early tracks is powerful, brutal metronomic beats that anchor the chaos. On songs like She's in a Bad Mood and Shaking Hell, his playing provides the foundation for the guitar's noise experiments. But as the sessions progress, the tension becomes undeniable. Midway through recording, Sclavunos makes a decision. He quits. It's a crisis moment. The album is unfinished, they've already spent the money from Serisol's dental fund, and now they have no drummer. The band has to make a difficult choice. Approach Bob Burt, the drummer they fired just months earlier, and ask him to come back. The conversation is awkward, fraught with the memory of Moore's harsh criticisms during the Swans tour. But Burt agrees, on one condition. They can't fire him again after this is over. The band accepts, and Burt returns to finish the album. His presence changes the sound. On Making the Nature Scene, Burt's drumming is more aggressive, more straightforward rock and roll compared to Sclavunos' controlled precision. The contrast between the two drummers creates an unintentional dynamic across the album, two different approaches to the same aesthetic mission. Years later, sources would note that Sclavunos appeared on most tracks, with Burt handling Making the Nature Scene and the live recording of I Wanna Be Your Dog. The album credits list both drummers, a permanent record of the turbulent recording process. Inside Tears' basement, Sonic Youth is discovering the sounds that will define their career, even if they don't fully realize it yet. The guitars are modified in real time. Drumsticks get wedged under strings to create metallic, clanging tones. Screwdrivers are inserted at specific frets to alter the instrument's timbre. The band has learned that cheap guitars, manipulated correctly, can produce sounds that expensive instruments never could. Bang a drumstick on a pawn shop Stratocaster copy in the right way, crank the amplifier until it's about to blow, and it sounds like church bells ringing in hell. Everything on Confusion is Sex is still in standard tuning. This is before Branca's visit to Moore's apartment, before the revelation of alternate tunings. But the band is already pushing boundaries, finding new ways to make their instruments speak. The recording aesthetic embraces lo-fi as artistic choice. Tears captures sounds that are deliberately murky, buried in layers of distortion and room noise. The 8-track limitations mean there's no way to polish the rough edges, no option for extensive overdubs or mixing trickery. What goes down on tape is what you get. On Inhuman, the guitars sound like crashed windows, shattered glass transformed into rhythm. The World Looks Red, features tones that one reviewer compared to subway brakes screeching. These aren't accidents. They're deliberate explorations of noise as musical element, texture as composition. Michael Gira of Swans, a band that shared rehearsal space with Sonic Youth and understood the downtown aesthetic, contributes to the album by writing "The World Looks Red." His presence connects Confusion is Sex to the broader no-wave community, the network of artists pushing music into increasingly extreme territory. The influence of Glenn Branca hangs over everything. His compositions for multiple electric guitars, his exploration of dissonance and harmonic possibilities beyond standard rock music have shown Sonic Youth what's possible. They're not there yet, not ready to fully embrace the alternate tuning experiments that will define their later work, but the foundation is being laid. Moore later described his discomfort with standard tuning, his feeling that he couldn't express himself within traditional parameters. The pressure of competing with technically proficient guitarists in standard tuning felt impossible. Confusion is Sex represents the last moment before they discover their true voice, the sound of a band pushing against limitations they haven't yet figured out how to transcend. One of the album's strangest moments happens outside Tears' basement entirely. Freezer Burn earns its title literally. The track is recorded inside an actual walk-in freezer at a deli near the studio. The specifics remain somewhat mysterious in the historical record, but the choice is pure Sonic Youth. Unconventional, deliberately uncomfortable, seeking sounds that can't be captured in normal circumstances. The freezer provides a unique acoustic environment, cold, reflective surfaces creating a particular kind of reverb and resonance. The temperature affects the instruments, the performance, everything about the sound. It's an extreme example of location recording, turning environmental limitations into aesthetic opportunities. According to later interviews, Thurston Moore mentioned that they mixed additional guitar feedback into the cooler sounds they captured in the recording. The result is an unsettling intro that serves as a bridge. Specifically, it transitions into their cover of the Stooges' "I Wanna Be Your Dog." But that cover version wasn't recorded in the freezer or in Tears' basement. It comes from the road, from the tour that preceded these recording sessions. A moment captured live that becomes essential to understanding what Sonic Youth is trying to do. November 15, 1982. The Pier in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sonic Youth is in the middle of their first real tour, the Savage Blunder Tour supporting Swans through the American South. The shows have been intense, confrontational, pushing audiences beyond their comfort zones. Tonight they decide to cover the Stooges' "I Wanna Be Your Dog," a punk classic that seems, on the surface, straightforward. But Sonic Youth doesn't do straightforward. With Bob Burt still on drums, this is before his firing. The band launches into a version that's absolutely feral. Kim Gordon takes the vocals, and what emerges is 3 minutes of pure panic. An unstable, bubbling performance that critic Greil Marcus would later describe as sounding like a witch's cauldron that could dissolve anything. Someone has the foresight to record this performance, capturing it on whatever equipment is available at the venue. The audio quality is exactly what you'd expect from a live recording in a small club in 1982. Rough, distorted, visceral. Around the same time, Gordon is writing an essay about Glenn Branca for Art Forum magazine. In it, she explores a fundamental truth about performance. People pay to see others believe in themselves. On stage, in the midst of rock and roll, anything can happen. Performers appear to submit to the audience, but in the process, they gain control through the awe inspired by their total submission. That's exactly what's happening during "I Wanna Be Your Dog." Gordon's howling vocals, the band's complete abandonment to the music's violence, it's terrifying and transcendent. If the Stooges' original version has the violence of a drunken bar fight, Sonic Youth's rendition has the gleeful psychosis of something far darker. When it comes time to assemble Confusion is Sex, this live recording becomes essential. It captures something that can't be replicated in a studio: the raw, confrontational energy of Sonic Youth in performance, the sense of danger that makes them unforgettable. The decision to include it, sandwiched between studio tracks, gives the album an unstable quality. Nothing is polished, nothing is safe. The listener is thrown between controlled chaos in the basement and uncontrolled chaos on stage, never quite finding solid ground. As the album sessions wind down, one track remains, a solo piece by Lee Ranaldo that will close the record. Lee is Free is recorded not in Tears' basement, not in a freezer, not live on stage, but at Ranaldo's own apartment on a cassette recorder. It's the most lo-fi moment on an already lo-fi album, a track that sounds like it's being transmitted from another dimension. Kim Gordon gives it the title, recognizing that this is purely Ranaldo's creation, free from the collaborative process that defines the rest of the album. The piece has a Far Eastern quality, something folkish and contemplative that stands in stark contrast to the violence and aggression of everything that precedes it. It's an odd choice for a closing track, ambient, spacious, almost meditative after the assault of the previous songs. But it serves a purpose, providing a moment of breath, a coda that lets the listener decompress after being bludgeoned for 35 minutes. Critically, it also demonstrates the range Sonic Youth is already exploring even at this early stage. They're not just a noise band. They're artists interested in texture, in dynamics, in the full spectrum of what sound can do. The album is complete, 9 tracks representing wildly different recording environments and approaches, held together by a shared aesthetic vision. Sklavounos has left, Bert has returned, and now the band has to figure out what to do with what they've created. Kim Gordon pulls out a sketch she'd drawn for an early gig poster, a rough portrait of Thurston Moore. The image is stark, primitive, rendered in heavy black lines. It had appeared on flyers for shows back when they were still calling themselves the Arcadians. Before settling on Sonic Youth, this becomes the cover of Confusion is Sex. On the original gig poster, you could see where the Arcadians had been crudely pasted over, where Dog Eat Dog had been scratched out. For the album, Gordon scrawls Confusion is Sex over the image. The aesthetic is deliberately raw, Xeroxed and re-Xeroxed until the image degrades, achieving that downtown New York DIY look that defines the era. Lee Ranaldo creates a photo collage for the back cover. Catherine Ceresol, one of the album's funders, contributes crumpled Xeroxed images for the insert. The entire package looks like it was assembled in someone's apartment, which it essentially was. There's nothing slick about it, nothing that suggests professional design. It looks like what it is: art made by artists who can't afford to think about commercial presentation. The band includes a lyric sheet featuring a photo of a young Kim Gordon with her brother. The credits are minimal. The vinyl labels themselves become part of the aesthetic. Side 1 features the album cover. Side 2 lists the tracks in a deliberately confusing order that adds to the album's disorienting effect. Everything about the visual presentation reinforces the music's message. This is uncompromising, unpolished, unconcerned with whether you like it or not. Take it or leave it, but don't expect it to make things easy for you. The exact release date remains disputed. Some sources claim February 1983, others say March or April. The release party happens on April 30th. The confusion seems appropriate for an album titled Confusion is Sex. Neutral Records presses a small run of vinyl. Distribution is limited, sold mainly through live performances and mail order. There's no promotional budget, no radio airplay, no music video to send to MTV. The marketing strategy consists of playing shows and hoping the underground press notices. Glenn Branca's label is too small to push the album into wider circulation. About a year after the initial release, Zensor in Germany issues the album, giving it slightly broader European distribution after Sonic Youth tours extensively throughout 1983. The critical reception is sharply divided. Some reviewers are baffled, calling the album impenetrable, dismissing it as self-indulgent noise. Blender later describes it as a strike against pop goop and practically a manifesto against pleasure. Greg Kot of the Chicago Tribune claims that Sonic Youth's attempts at capturing their noise guitar revolution fell flat on this album, but others immediately recognize something groundbreaking. Trouser Press publishes a 1984 review by John Leland that captures what Sonic Youth is achieving. Confusion reigns, and happily so. This album sprays out slivers of ringing, reeling, screaming six-string debris, much of it produced with drumsticks and weird tunings. Leland understands that the album participates in Glenn Branca's dissonance experiments, channels the anarchy of bands like Flipper, captures the desperation of public image lateed. These Lower East Side artists are documenting the violence and hope of their neighborhood. If it hits like an oral root canal, that's exactly what the doctor ordered. AllMusic calls it lo-fi to the point of tonal drabness, as the instruments seem to ring out in only one tone, that of screechy noise. But years later, retrospective reviews recognize it as foundational, abrasive and archaic, theatrical and confrontational, establishing Sonic Youth's innovative use of dissonant structures. Entertainment Weekly's Chuck Eddy eventually calls it the band's funniest, hardest rocking, and most underrated album ever. Spin claims it stands as the great document of early Sonic Youth. The underground audience gets it immediately. In the cramped venues of downtown Manhattan, at CBGB and similar spaces, Sonic Youth's live shows build a devoted following. The album becomes required listening for anyone interested in what's happening at the edges of American music in the early 1980s. Confusion is Sex sold modestly, a few thousand copies in its initial run. It didn't chart, didn't receive mainstream attention, didn't make the band any money. By conventional measures, it was a failure. But its influence proved immeasurable. The album established the blueprint for noise rock as a viable genre. Bands that followed, Dinosaur Jr., My Bloody Valentine, Pixies, Nirvana, all drew from what Sonic Youth pioneered on this record. The idea that cheap guitars and broken equipment could be assets rather than limitations. That noise and dissonance could be compositional tools rather than mistakes. That lo-fi production could be an aesthetic choice rather than a technical failure. These concepts rippled outward through alternative music for decades. Most importantly for Sonic Youth themselves, Confusion is Sex taught them crucial lessons. Shortly after completing the album, Glenn Branca made his famous visit to Thurston Moore's apartment, arriving with 6 guitars under his arms, no cases, throwing them onto Moore's futon. One guitar had 6.10 gauge strings, all tuned to E. Branca opened the door to alternate tunings, showing them possibilities beyond standard EADGB. That revelation led directly to their next phase. The albums where they'd fully realize their vision, where the alternate tunings would allow them to create the controlled chaos they'd been reaching for all along. Bad Moon Rising, Evol, Sister, Daydream Nation. None of those albums could have existed without Confusion is Sex establishing the foundation. The album also proved something essential about artistic integrity. Sonic Youth could have compromised, could have tried to sand down the rough edges, could have attempted something more commercially viable. Instead, they leaned into the chaos, embraced the limitations, created something uncompromising and pure. When critics look back at the album now, what once seemed impenetrable has become influential. The ghostly lattice work of pulsing drones and shimmering feedback that seemed alien in 1983 sounds like a direct ancestor of ambient electronic music, of shoegaze, of post-rock. The techniques Sonic Youth pioneered have been absorbed into the DNA of modern alternative music. For the no-wave movement, Confusion is Sex represents a culmination, the moment when the downtown New York experimental scene produced something that could exist as both art statement and rock album. It captured 1983 New York City in all its filthy creative glory, a sound that couldn't have come from anywhere else, created by people who couldn't have made anything else. The album's title proved prophetic: Confusion reigns, and happily so. In that confusion, Sonic Youth found their voice, established their legacy, and created a document that continues to confuse, challenge, and inspire listeners more than 4 decades later. The chaos was the point. The basement was the point. The freezer, the cassette recorder, the fired and rehired drummer, the borrowed money claimed to be for dental work, all of it was necessary to create something genuinely new. Confusion is Sex isn't just an album. It's proof that limitations properly embraced become possibilities. Thank you for watching this deep dive into Confusion is Sex. If you found this story compelling and want to support more music documentaries like this, please subscribe to the Sound Vault. Your support keeps these untold stories alive. What album should we cover next? Let us know in the comments. Así ellos.